Diversidad, equidad e inclusión. Todos entendemos lo mismo cuando escuchamos esas palabras. Veamos pues, ¿qué es en lo que Estados Unidos ha gastado $1.000 millones durante la última década y por qué están dispuestos a cambiar de rumbo? El enfrentamiento es bastante sencillo. Por un lado hay un grupo que quiere que el Estado eduque a tus hijos sobre temas relacionados, por ejemplo, a la sexualidad y asuntos raciales. Y por el otro están los que opinan que esos temas deben quedarse exclusivamente en el territorio de la educación familiar, como pasa, por ejemplo, con la religión. Podemos resumirlo diciendo que están los que están a favor y los que están en contra de la ideología woke. Algunos críticos sostienen que los programas de diversidad, equidad e inclusión pueden exacerbar tensiones raciales e incluso ser bastante excluyentes. Sin embargo, los defensores argumentan que son esenciales para garantizar una educación más equitativa y más justa. El actual gobierno de Estados Unidos considera que el sistema educativo se fue alejando de su misión original y en lugar de formar ciudadanos libres, críticos y responsables, empezó a imponer una mirada única. Una mirada que muchas veces terminaba censurando las diferencias de pensamiento. De hecho, esa es una postura que grandes empresas del mundo están considerando. Facebook, Instagram y WhatsApp, todas propiedades de Meta, Target, IBM, Amazon, McDonald's, Walmart, Ford, Harley Davidson, en fin, todos ellos consideran que la aplicación de esas políticas les ha traído más fricciones que beneficios entre el personal. ¿Por qué te cuento esto? Porque si el país más poderoso del planeta está replanteándose la forma en la que educa a sus próximas generaciones, definitivamente es algo de lo que debes ser consciente. En medio de semejante trifulca, un sector importante de Estados Unidos está de acuerdo con un cierre eventual del Departamento de Educación a nivel federal y así devolverle a los estados y a las familias el control sobre la enseñanza y garantizar que los recursos vayan directamente a quienes los necesitan, sin burocracia y sin adoctrinamiento. O sea, recuperar la libertad académica y que cada familia mande a sus hijos a la escuela que considere más afín a sus creencias y a sus valores. De esto vamos a hablar el día de hoy. ¿Tú quieres estar seguro de lo que aprenden tus hijos en la escuela? ¿O estás dispuesto a dejar que los demás tomen decisiones en asuntos clave en la formación de un ser humano? ¿Cómo te va? Soy Gabriel Bauduco y a nombre del Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom te doy las gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Te pido que te suscribas al canal, que le des clic a la campanita, que nos dejes un like y que nos comentes. ¿Qué opinas? ¿Tú estás dispuesto a dejar la educación de tus hijos en manos de alguien más? ¿Tú estás dispuesta a que la formación integral sobre valores de tus hijos esté en manos de la escuela o prefieres hacerlo tú misma? Creo que ese es el tema de conversación en el programa de hoy. Vamos a conversar con Paul Renner. Paul Renner fue presidente de la Cámara de Representantes de la Florida con un especial interés en la materia educativa. ¿Usted cree que el presidente tiene los votos necesarios porque esta reforma debe pasar por el Congreso de Estados Unidos?
Well, in Florida, we don't have the filibuster, which the federal government and the Senate, they continue that tradition of requiring 60 votes. And of course, the Republicans don't have 60 votes. So they would have to have Democrats go along with them to make policy changes that don't fall under this idea of reconciliation. And I'm not an expert on reconciliation, but in general, these are budgetary type issues. And that big, beautiful bill that they're working on between the House and Senate could include, and I would suspect would include, an effort to try to tie the money that would come out of the Department of Education with the policy of shutting it down. I think certainly they can defund the Department of Education, which is to say, not pay the employees, not continue to keep the lights on there, but whether they can actually formally pull it down, formally, take it out of the law, may or may not, depending on the parliamentarians, the parliamentarian in the Senate, that is, reside in that person's decision about whether it can be done through reconciliation or not. And if it's not, I suspect that Democrats are going to oppose this because they want to control things at the federal level.
En su experiencia, ¿de qué manera podría afectar este recorte presupuestal en el desempeño de los estados para tener el poder de dirigir la educación?
If education shuts down, then what I would expect is if not all of the money, some of that money will now flow through in the form of a block grant or some way in that respect. Obviously, it will not change things like Title I, for kids that are on free or reduced lunch. That's not what's being proposed. It's just the building and the people in the building and all that bureaucracy to be closed down. The federal government can continue to do things that fund education, but the states and even the locals should determine the application of those resources within some limits. And so I'm hopeful that they will give us the greatest flexibility possible. I would prefer that all money be spent at the state and local level and no money or have the federal government involved in any way, shape, or form at the federal level. But I don't think they'll go that far. I think that would be unlikely. But I do hope they'll send more money our way that we can then apply to comply with federal regulations in a way that makes the most sense for Florida and the Florida education system.
¿Por qué usted cree que el Departamento de Educación se debe eliminar del nivel federal?
Well, quite simply, it's not the role of the federal government to be involved in education. And, if you look at the Constitution, and there's been no amendment with respect to education, or frankly, healthcare is another area where Obamacare lifted a lot of control away from states to regulate in healthcare to the federal government. The federal government was always considered to be based on limited enumerated powers, meaning those powers that are actually listed in the Constitution. And then those are things like the military, making sure the postal system works, making sure there's some, interchange where states aren't taxing each other or tariffing each other within trade among states. For the federal authority, but through court decisions and a long history, it's grown to be whatever they want it to be, and they continue to draw away power from we the people, those of us at the bottom of the pyramid, up into a point at the top of the pyramid. And the idea there is you don't want people who have never been to Florida, who don't know the issues in Florida, to make decisions for the people of Florida. And so this idea of subsidiarity is the term that was used, is that the government closest to the people governs that people better than those that are sitting in a capital far, far away.
Permítame continuar hablando sobre la educación, que es un tema en el que usted ha puesto especial interés a lo largo de su carrera legislativa. Con esta idea de la expansión de la libertad educativa, usted ha propuesto cosas interesantes que tienen que ver con un sistema de vouchers para que los alumnos puedan elegir y casi que personalizar su educación. Por favor, cuénteme de eso.
Well, I think this is a change in education that will continue to improve education for generations. I think it's a generational reform and positions Florida to be among the very best educational systems in the country. And let me explain why. First of all, we adopt the principle that public education is to provide for every student financial support in the form of this voucher. Mm-hmm. So every child universally receives the same amount of money. It's around $8,000, and they can use that for a multitude of purposes. The one that we had used previously was kids that wanted to leave a public school and go to a private school could carry that voucher and apply it to tuition alone at that private school and then pay whatever the difference might be. Mm-hmm. This reform is much broader than that and allows for full customization. So let's say you're a homeschool student, but you want to receive some instruction in physics or chemistry, which requires some expense of laboratories and things of that nature. You could actually contract with your local public school to go one day a week. Maybe you go every Wednesday or every Thursday to go to a physics course. And it could actually contract between the parent and the school to receive that education in a traditional public school format. Or you could go to a charter school, or you could take that same instruction and go to a private school. You could go 4 days a week to a private school, but one day to a public school. So it's fully customizable, so that the idea central to this reform is that every child learns differently, and every child and every parent has a fundamental right to send their child and deliver an education that best fits their needs. Even brothers and sisters learn differently.
Eso podría significar una revolución en la educación, es decir, la idea de personalizar el aprendizaje de acuerdo, a veces no solo los intereses, sino las capacidades de cada alumno, y crear seres humanos mucho más eficientes en su aprendizaje. Muchas veces tenemos la idea de que tenemos un panorama general, pero poca especialización. Eso sería una gran cosa, Speaker. Quisiera, por último, dos cosas. La primera decir es, usted es un orgulloso alumno de la educación pública y en consecuencia lo ha hecho poner especial interés en la reforma del sistema educativo. ¿Cree que verá sus objetivos cumplidos?
I know. I'm proud of public education as well. I was a public school kid. My mother was a public school teacher. You know, during my time as speaker, we dramatically, I think over $1 billion extra money to raise teachers' salaries in our public schools. And so we do value our public schools. We also made reforms to take away some things that may be holding them back from a regulatory standpoint. And so these are things that we ought to do to make sure that every school is functioning at its highest level. In school choice, one of the benefits of school choice is because of that competition, it has made our public schools also better. We see exciting things in our public schools. For example, here in Miami-Dade, where I'm sitting today, there's a conversion of a public school to begin to use the classical education model, which is a model that I'm a big fan of. I think it's very much going to be part of our future. Schools in Indian River County as well as Sarasota County are also looking at changing an existing public school, and it will still be public, but taking a model that goes back to the Greeks and the Romans and the early Christian church, and really the deepest foundations of Western civilization, of what it means to be a free people, what it means to study truth and beauty and goodness, so that education lifts us up. It's not simply about checking boxes, but it actually makes you a fundamentally better person, a moral person. And we want to make sure through education we're transmitting our values that will continue to allow us to thrive in the future.
Por último, usted ha pedido información sobre los alcances de los programas de DEI, de diversidad, equidad e inclusión en las escuelas públicas, con el objetivo de comprender qué tanto se ha extendido estos programas con el uso de recursos públicos. Algunas personas opinan que remover los asuntos de diversidad, equidad e inclusión del sistema de educación público atenta contra las libertades. Me gustaría preguntarle cuál es su perspectiva política de este asunto.
Product, DEI is first and foremost an example of the ideological capture of our universities. And so it is also an example of what we see, the Orwellian idea, if you've read 1984, where the Ministry of Peace was actually the Ministry of War, where things are called one thing that actually mean another. And in this case, when they talk about diversity, they're really talking about conformity of thought. We believe in diversity of thought, that all ideas, if you're going to teach Karl Marx, you should also teach Adam Smith. And I'm here at the Adam Smith Center today where I'm speaking to you, but and also apply those ideas to how they have worked for real people when they've been put into practice. And in the one case, in the case of Marxism, it has led to prison, poverty, and death. And in the case of Adam Smith, it has lifted more people out of poverty for the free markets and economic freedom than any other system ever known by man. And so this is what we want on the college campuses. We want diversity of thought. The DEI, or the diversity in DEI, is really about conformity. The equity is about picking winners and losers and grouping people into two groups of oppressor and oppressed. And again, this is kind of a Marxist notion that there are certain groups that have been oppressing us, whether it's based on class
Absolutamente.
and these types of concepts, which is absolute garbage. And it comes straight out of the same people who, again, have driven us into poverty, prison, and death in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Russia, and the list goes on. And the idea that we're going to try it again in a different format and it's going to work marvelously is just not going to happen. And so it is the right thing for us to do to end ideological capture on campus. And DEI is nothing more than a pernicious trap for students to teach them one form of ideology at the exclusion of every other form of thought, and that is intolerable. It's the exact opposite of what universities are stood up and meant to be. That is not their purpose. It is the opposite of their purpose, and I'm glad we ended it. We ended the funding for it. We also said that professors are not going to be forced when they interview for a job to fill out forms determining whether they are on board or not with the ideological orthodoxy of DEI. Again, that is not what a university is designed to do. We believe in intellectual freedom and academic freedom, but that means freedom for everyone, not just one side of the issue.
Y por cierto, no hay nada más diverso que la idea de personalizar la educación. Muchas gracias, Speaker Runner.
It's great to be with you. Muchas gracias.
Mi siguiente conversación es con alguien que tiene 26 años de experiencia en asuntos educativos, miembro de la Junta Escolar del Condado de Miami-Dade en la Florida, alguien que cuenta con muchísimo expertise en temas de educación y no en temas teóricos, en el salón de clases. Mónica, muchas gracias por tomar esta conversación.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on your show.
Mónica, tú tienes una amplia experiencia en la carrera educativa, en la docencia, y has sido muy crítica sobre las ideas progresistas en el salón de clases. Sin embargo, vives en una comunidad plagada de diversidades, ¿no? La Florida es probablemente uno de los estados de Estados Unidos con mayor diversidad, quizás junto con California. Entonces, la pregunta es, ¿qué propones para ver cuestiones de raza, diversidad, género, en fin, estas cosas con las que seguramente te has encontrado en el salón y con las que probablemente has tenido que trabajar en tu día a día en la docencia?
Absolutely. Teaching in a diverse community, I embrace it. I welcome, and I have over my entire career, teaching children of all races, of all ethnicities, whether they're male or female. To me, it doesn't matter. And I think as a community, living in a diverse community, we have to look at what unifies us, what makes us alike, which we're all individuals, we're all humans. We all have in common that we want to do what's right, what's good, what's true. So that is what's most important to me as an educator and as someone that's had 26 years of experience in the classroom.
Es muchísimo tiempo. Y durante estos 26 años en la docencia, ¿has visto que los programas de diversidad, equidad, inclusión han sido efectivos de alguna forma o no?
Well, we're talking about two different things. Programs that are imposed about diversity is...
Por supuesto.
The DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that are imposed upon institutions. Mm-hmm. I think that's what we're getting at here. And that is where we get into the problems, especially when you start talking about introducing agendas into classrooms. And that is a way that it has, through the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm not talking about having different people of different races, of different ethnicities. That's something different. This is taking away the diversity of thought, the diversity of discussion, mm-hmm. and trying to have everyone think the same way And that is what I have a problem with. And also when you try to put in ideologies of transgender ideology into the classroom, which is something that should be left to the parent, which is something that should be educated
Ok,
by the parent.
entonces esto es importante que lo aclaremos porque no es que tú estás en contra de esto, sino que crees que debe ser discutido o ser parte de la educación familiar.
Absolutely. And that's something that I feel strongly about as an educator. And I'm a very strong advocate of parental rights. So those topics that instill the values and the morals into students and their parents and their children, that's topics at home. The school needs to focus on the academics, the reading, the
O
writing.
sea, dejarlo en
knowing
el
the United
territorio, hablas de dejarlo en el territorio de la potestad familiar, digamos.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those sensitive topics, especially the younger the student is,
Claro.
they really are not well equipped, nor do they have the critical thinking skills to handle them, to tackle them.
Sobre todo además porque no hay que... algunas ideologías progresistas de izquierda absolutamente hablan de la necesidad de que esto suceda en las escuelas por si los padres no lo hacen. Pero no debemos olvidar la responsabilidad de los padres en este sentido.
Absolutely. And we do have a responsibility as parents to teach our children right from wrong, to be fair to all people, and the school can support that. But it's not something to be a program should not be a diversity, equity, inclusion in a university that a child that's more qualified to be in a program doesn't get it because of who they are based on their race or ethnicity. It should be on their merit and on their credentials of what they bring. So that's, and quite frankly, I think that we have to look at a society, we fought for so long for civil rights, that these rights apply to equality. And there's a very big difference between equity and equality.
Absolutamente. Mónica, en este sentido, ¿cuáles son los escenarios más difíciles en los que te ha tocado trabajar a lo largo de estas, pues ya casi 3 décadas en la docencia?
I say there's, just as a teacher, keeping focused on what's important academically. We have to separate as a teacher. It doesn't matter when you walk into the classroom, you need to leave at the door your ideologies. You need to leave at the door what your political beliefs are.
Claro.
Those need to stay out because whether we like it or not, as a teacher, you have great influence on the lives of students.
Totalmente.
And they look up to you, they respect you. So there's a very fine line. There's a very fine line, and we have to be very, very protective. And as an educator and as a mother, I wouldn't want someone else to come in and impose their thoughts and their views on my child. And I always put myself in the place of the parent.
Totalmente. ¿Y eso que dices, esa delgada línea, cuántas veces ha sido cruzada de un lado y del otro, no?
I think if you look nowadays, it's being crossed all the time. I mean, you look at what's happening in the current presidential administration, where they've found monies going for our taxpayer dollars, going for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs to promote transgender programs in foreign countries. I mean, these are our tax dollars. These are things that people, whether you agree or disagree with them, should not be funded by the federal government, by our hardworking tax dollars.
Ese es un gran punto. Los legisladores han denunciado que los fondos públicos fluyen enormemente en el sentido de estos programas de DEI. ¿A ti te consta como docente? ¿Lo has visto?
Well, right now, in my position as a school board member, there is an executive order that was signed by the president that if there is any schools engaging in DEI, they can jeopardize losing their federal funding. So that is very important that we cannot, and this has been coming for years and years and years. This is not something that DEI just didn't occur overnight. It's been a movement over many years, And now it's being exposed for what it is. It had a pretty little name. And quite frankly, we need to look at what it has done. I think we need to focus on unity, not division. And DEI, unfortunately, for many times, it can cause division.
Sí, totalmente. Te conozco, he conversado contigo muchas veces y sé que eres una persona respetuosa de la otredad, de los otros. Y sé también que has enfrentado muchos desafíos en la carrera docente con estos asuntos. Entonces, para cerrar, quisiera pedirte un consejo, Mónica, sobre cómo ser respetuosa de la diversidad, de la raza, del género, de la religión, de las ideologías políticas, de la diversidad completa en la gran expresión de la palabra, manteniéndote como docente sin avasallar las libertades.
Respect everybody. Engage in discourse and debate. Do so respectfully and be open to a person that has a different point of view and listen to why. Don't just shut them down.
Claro, totalmente. Es Mónica Colucci. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, supongo que todos entendemos que la educación es fundamental. Supongo que todos entendemos que la diversidad, la equidad y la inclusión son importantes. La pregunta es la misma que te hice al comienzo del programa. Son importantes, sí, pero todos entendemos lo mismo cuando mencionamos esas palabras. Y ahí, justo ahí, está la clave del episodio de hoy. Vamos a dejar por hoy este tema y vamos a darnos una vuelta para ver qué está pasando puertas adentro del Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. Bueno, abrimos este repaso internacional en Perú, donde el director fundador del Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, Carlos Díaz Rosillo, mantuvo un realmente importante encuentro con la presidenta Dina Boluarte, un encuentro que reafirma el compromiso del centro con el fortalecimiento de la democracia, los mercados libres y el Estado de Derecho en América Latina. Muy pronto se anunciarán nuevas iniciativas en Perú. También en Lima, el centro participó activamente del segundo encuentro de think tanks de Iberoamérica. Ese encuentro se realizó del 8 al 10 de abril bajo un lema: Nuevos retos de un futuro compartido. Allí se congregaron destacados centros de pensamiento, líderes políticos, académicos de América Latina, Europa y Estados Unidos. El Adam Smith Center lideró el grupo de trabajo titulado Libertad contra el totalitarismo en Latinoamérica. Fue moderado por Frank Zimmerman y tuvo como un orador importante al doctor Carlos Díaz Rosillo. El evento concluyó con un llamado a reforzar la colaboración entre los think tanks ante los crecientes desafíos democráticos de la región. Además, el centro organizó un evento especial titulado Una mirada al interior de Madrid desatado, un imán para la inversión extranjera. Allí se analizó, junto al alcalde José Luis Martínez Almeida, por qué Madrid se consolida como uno de los principales centros de atracción para la inversión global gracias a su rol estratégico como puente entre Europa y América Latina. La presencia de la presidenta de la Florida International University, Janet Núñez, le dio un significado institucional aún más profundo. Bueno, ahora sí, fue todo por hoy, pero antes de irte, si no lo hiciste antes, clic en la campanita, déjanos un comentario sobre el episodio de hoy, suscríbete al canal y nos vemos la próxima.